Okay, good evening, everyone. You're welcome to the next of our county leadership series. Tonight I am joined by Paula Prunty, so I'll let Paula say a quick hello there herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm just looking at the attendance there, Lynn. I think it's a tough crowd in tonight, so we better be prepared.
So I'm delighted because Paula will be taking your questions on the Q&A in the chat, so we can so send as many tough questions as you want towards Paula. There's no issue at all. So I suppose on that note, if you do want to ask any questions to it, type them in the Q&A function, and Paul will be monitoring that and coming in this as well. Or feel free to put them in the chat. So at any stage, if you can't hear it, just log out, log back in. Sometimes the connection goes on you, but hopefully we'll keep you for the next 2 hours. No, we won't. We definitely won't keep you for 2 hours. But we'll get started. So a huge welcome. It is hard to believe that it is planning time for fixtures again for 2023. The year has flown by. So we are hoping that what we give you tonight will assist you and I suppose just spark a few thoughts when you are putting your fixture plans, etc. in place. So very quickly, just in the chat, if you want to type in a few things of what you think worked well in relation to fixtures in your county. And I know we're Irish and we don't like talking about the good stuff, but there is thousands of fixtures took place across the country this year. And that's credit to everyone who was organising them in the counties. So there was loads of good stuff that worked in the counties. So don't be afraid to blow your own trumpet for a second about what worked well with fixtures in the county, and let Paula might keep an eye on the chat there.
Yeah, I will. I'd say they're all anxiously typing away there, Lynn. But yeah, as you say, like 2023 has been the first, 2022, even I'm in 2023 already. 2022 has been our first real proper year to see full activity back up across all our pitches. So it probably was a very busy year for all our fixtures coordinators. I think they're still typing, unless, Lynn, the group we've in, nothing worked well for them tonight, and that's why they're all here to listen to you and all your good advice. And
I suppose we'll let you do both at the same time. So the next question is going to be the challenges as well. So feel free to type the stuff that worked well or the challenges. Because as I said, we're great at talking about the bad stuff at times, but we're not so good at talking about the good stuff in relation to it. So yeah, just take a couple of seconds. I know, Paula, we have plenty of examples as well of good and that the people have given to us too throughout the year.
Exactly. Somebody was saying their chat is disabled. Is it just him or is it on our side? So we asking questions, not letting them tell us. Shouldn't be disabled.
Unless Paula has disabled it, but no, it shouldn't. It shouldn't be.
No, it shouldn't be. Chat is disabled. Yeah, none of them can type it.
Try it there now, everyone. I blame Paula. She does this every now and again.
Well, you just said they could all send me really tough questions, so it's the better thing to do. Hopefully now, if somebody can try it there again.
Perfect.
Yeah,
so
it's working now. Brilliant.
Any around the challenges or the good stuff? Just for 30 seconds, we're going to keep an eye on some of this. Or as I said, feel free to type in Q&A as well. There's no issue.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, now that it's working for them, that's perfect.
You do anything to get out of questions.
Exactly. Love questions. I suppose some of the challenges, though, that we probably came across, Lynn, even, people ringing us was, I'd say, grading and stuff like that, which obviously might have been a little bit off over the 2 years due to things like COVID. So people have said about working well was liaising with other codes before sending out the fixture calendar this year. So that's a good example. Somebody's new to fixtures, so for juvenile, and they find the time required is enormous. Yeah, it's a busy role, fixture coordinating. Clashes with camogie, meaning that some teams couldn't field where football is very much a minority sport. So, and
I suppose if you look at even those 2 points around time required, the clashes, I suppose that's why the planning piece is key, and what we're going to talk about now, and kind of going to that first point about before stuff's published, where does it all fit in, and hopefully make it a bit easier for going forward. So yeah, some good stuff there in relation to the challenges and the benefits in relation to it. So we'll get stuck into some of these and hopefully it'll try and help it out a little bit. all we're giving you tonight is a little kind of overview. We can't go in and say, here's the perfect fixture plan, because every county's different, every club's different. I know I've had a few counties going, can you come down and help us with a fixture plan? We can give you the tools, the guidance of pulling it together, but you need to look at what's going to meet your county, because what meets one county certainly won't meet the requirements of another. So very much looking at what you have yourself. So on the key ingredients, there's 4 stages to it. Planning, and we'll go into these in a bit more detail. Designing each competition. So what's your number of teams? What's the structure? There's nothing worse if you're like, yeah, perfect, the under 16 championship will fit in there, and then you realize, well, sure, we didn't even account for 2 other rounds that we needed to make that structure work. So how many teams are going to be, the structure, the number of rounds, where will it be in the season, what days of the week will it be? So all the things around the planning piece, and then checking that should be foreign registration. All the times we read this and we still didn't see service board in it, the foreign registration system, to see what suits your county, because particularly for the younger age groups coming up, sometimes you can say X club, or should they had a really strong under 14 team, but actually when you look at the registration team, maybe they're really struggling at under 12s, which is going to be the next under 14. So just because they had a good bunch that time doesn't mean they're going to have another one coming up, or they were able to field 2 teams in a previous season, now they're only 1. So having a look at what's the registration numbers across the different age groups. The scheduling then means when you have all the plans, okay, what we're going to do, where do you actually physically put it into the calendar? So placing them into a calendar that's going to be published. So I think, as Michelle said there earlier, before it's published at all, what does it look like when we put it into the overall calendar? And I know for anyone that was at Central Council or seen notes in Central Council would have seen master fixture plan last night around, and that was very much the plan, etc., is done outside of that, and then it's put into the master fixture plan. So what does it look like when it actually goes into a plan? Arranging then is the specifics. So when it's actually there, what's the specifics of the fixture? So yes, you might have the minor championship going to be on this weekend in the scheduling, but in the arranging then it's okay, well, what day, what time, who's going to referee it, what's the venue? So the specifics of it. And it is so important to have competition guidelines in place to ensure that fixtures are played when scheduled. And we're going to touch base on that in a few slides. That's the key, is the competition guidelines. And we'll touch base on that and you'll see why. And then sometimes this is the step that's missed, which is reviewing it. And it's collating all the statistical information, because sometimes we can just say, okay, we ran out the fixtures and next year we'll just roll out the same thing again and the same thing again the year after. But do we learn from stuff that really worked well? Do we learn from stuff that didn't work well? Do we engage with our clubs to see maybe was there a structure or something that could have been better, that would have suited the needs better? And also looking around the national recommended standards, which we'll look at in a second. And the recommendations then from doing your review can be incorporated into the planning process for the following year. So a lot of you will be looking at your plans over the coming weeks and months, but have you looked back at what happened in 2022? What worked? Was there a particular time that age groups couldn't field? Was there learning lessons from what was in your plan this year? So the reviewing piece is really important. The competition types as well, that it's not always looking, there's loads of different competition types. You can have leagues, cups, championships, 7, 9, 11 aside, go games, winter, spring leagues, participation leagues, non-county player competitions, festivals of games. So there's loads and loads of competition types that you can have. Players get involved not to train all the time. They want to play games. So that is whether you're a county player, you're a non-county player, no matter what age you are, they want to play games. And there's nearly like a myth out there that the split season means club games don't start till the county ends. That's not the case. With the split season, yes, there's a county window that's the county teams is playing in, but the club plays throughout the year. There might be certain competitions that might not kick in. So obviously in a lot of counties, the adult championship, for instance, won't kick in till afterwards or until the team's knocked out. But if there's no competition at all, what about all the club players who aren't in the county team? So there has to be different competition types. And in fairness, I have to say, a lot of counties really sprung into this year for the first year of what was the so-called split season, to get more and more non-county players active. And that's really important. So it's not county players here, club, then the club kicks in. Make sure everybody has football throughout the season. That's the key part to it. and track players rather than teams. And I'll show a little map of this in a second, because we can talk about the player who has too much football. Oh, that player is going to be burnt out. We have far more players on the complete opposite end of the spectrum that aren't even getting a kick of a ball than we have on the burnt out end, because maybe they're only on one team. And you'll see that from a little map that we're going to show you now in a second. And some of the issues that were sent to us from counties, I suppose over the last few months, not enough gains be provided for players. So like that, maybe some players were seen as getting too many gains, but there was actually maybe a player who's a fringe player on the under 16s, and that's their only team. And there was only maybe 6 games for the year for under 16s only. Well, look how little football that player is getting. Do we expect to have her back next year? We'll be lucky. Too much or too little time between fixtures. So maybe no fixtures for ages and then playing 2 games in a week for the one age group. So looking at the spread of the games, too short a time period of fixtures. So like a bit like that, maybe I know, I'll give you an example. My nephew is playing at the minute, has hardly kicked a ball all year, and has been playing Sundays and Thursdays for the past 4 weeks in the depths nearly of the cold. Is his first football this year. So that's his under 20s will be nailed into that wee spot, but that's it. There was nothing for the rest of the year. So again, how is he supposed to keep it? So that's too short a time period. Fixtures not been set until time scale before due to the take place, so getting notification of them. Too many fixtures not taking place on their scheduled date or failing to fulfill, and that's where the competition guidelines are going to come in. So we'll stress that in more detail. County board meetings taken over by fixtures discussion. So I know even some of our county board officers would say to us, our county board meetings are nearly becoming fixtures meetings. Again, if there's no competition guidelines, that's going to happen. But if the competition guidelines are there, it shouldn't be near the county board meeting because it's already been addressed through the guidelines. Dual player clashes, and I know that was mentioned in some of the comments. County managers dictating fixtures, access to pitches, and especially with so much club activity in the latter end of the season, there was just so much club stuff happening on the same pitches across the way, and that led to both access to pitches and shortage of referees at times. So now's the time for a county to be planning, going, well, how many referees do we think we're going to have? Because we're not going to pluck them out of the air next year. We have to work with them and support them. And I know there's so much in the media about referees and stuff, and you wonder how much will actually result in actual support or lip service. So I think it's important that we don't pay lip service, that we actually do support the refs who are doing a key job in keeping our fixtures going. And then cooperation from clubs. So them actually agreeing to what it is. But again, the competition guidelines will help you out in relation to that. So just before we get into the nitty gritty of those stages, and I'm going to take Paul in a second as well in relation to these, but this is an example of what we're saying about, remember that not every player plays in more than one team. You do hear, oh, that player be burnt out, that player, but remember the player who doesn't. And that's why it's important that like that under 20 is not stuck into the end of the season and nothing else. And that's the players only team. So if you think of the under 14s for a second, 12 of them are under 14 only. It's their only team. And maybe some of them don't even get starting on the under 14s. So yeah, 8 of them will get some under 16 football as well, but 12 of them will only get under 14. So if they're all played off in just 2 months, that's the only football they'll have for the year. And that's if they get playing all those games. Look at the under 16s then, maybe 6 of them are just under 16. So they're not the players who are being moved up to minor. There might be 10 of them there, might be 8 who also are the under 14s. The same then if you go up to minor, that there's some of the under 18s only, and then the same with adult. So maybe there's 5 that come up from minor, but there's 16 adult club only. So the reason we're saying to track the player is, instead of us saying we have so many fixtures across the thing, don't put them in those blocks. But by putting them in the blocks, yes, you're tracking the good player maybe who's across teams, but the player who's on the fringe, or that's their only team, that's them done when that block's done. So that's what we mean about the spread of fixtures, and looking at that, and that's what we're going to show you, I suppose, over the next few slides. Paul, I don't know if you've anything on that before we move on.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really key point. And a lot of people say, oh, like we have, I don't know, 50, 60 clubs. How can we, consider and track all of this? But it's not even a case that you have to be able to pinpoint Paula Prunty or Lynn Savage, but you just have to keep the concept of what Lynn has just said on this slide in the back of your mind when you are planning maybe the under 14 activity throughout the year. Don't just think of it as the under 14 championship, but think of it collectively as how much activity are we giving the under 14s in a structured, meaningful competition. Because as Lynn says, all our players pay their membership not to train with us, but to actually get to play. And I know, Lynn, as well, a lot of work we do is with clubs in terms of their policy, maybe in relation to which team girls will play on, and trying to get clubs to prioritize that player who it's her final year at under 14, so she should be getting the game, bar the really good under 12 who they insist on bringing up to play on the 14s. So we're also trying to work with the clubs as well in terms of how they approach this too.
And I think like there's a huge amount, and I know we're embarking on our new plan at the minute, and just some of the initial feedback through surveys and stuff, but like retention of players is certainly coming up highly in relation to stuff. And if you think of a lot of fixture plans, okay, the adult stuff goes in first and a real focus, and a lot of the times it's nearly the under 14s comes in next, when the ages that are the hardest to retain, the 16s minors, tend to be the ones that fill the plug holes then in a fixture plan. So if they're the ones we really need to retain, how do we make sure their football is happening at good times of the year for them, and that they're getting plenty of football? So that's just to think of how we're going to retain those players, and particularly the ones that are more likely to drop off in relation to it. So the minimum standards, that these are up on our website and they're recommended. Okay, it's not saying they have to be in it. These were recommended standards, and they were suppose taken from a review of a load of activity that was happening. So the recommended standards was a minimum of 16 games for adults. That's throughout the year. Okay, so that's all your competitions. That's not you need 16 championship games. You'll be playing championships for the whole year. But 16 games that they're participating in. Under 15 to 18, minimum of 12 games, and under 14 and below, minimum of 16 games. Okay, and I know people might say, well, we're saying you might lose between 15 and 18, there's less games. And that is a key point. This is just a minimum of those games. The reason that was when we were going through the initial reviews, it was a lot less that age group was getting, because they were filling in the gaps. So by putting it any higher, we would have had no counties really at that stage achieving the goals that was there. Also, games been scheduled with gaps of no more than 21 days between them. So in other words, that you're not playing a game now and then not having another game for 6 weeks down the line. An exception obviously can be made around exam time, because accommodating students. And then games in the same grade should be scheduled at least 5 days apart. So as I said, these are all recommendations. So it's not saying different age groups can't be played 2 days in a row or whatever, but it's more scheduling them the same age grade, not too close together, to avoid surplus games. And the target for counties should be to ensure 80% of games are played as initially scheduled. Okay, so the day they were originally fixed for, or within a number of days either side of that original date. And that's where it's really good to have somebody who's literally reviewing the fixtures. So the fixtures committee can work away, but somebody who's literally tracking, going, these are the games supposed to be this weekend. Did it happen? No. And like at the end of the year, when you may have clubs giving out going, oh, well, giving out about games didn't take place and everything else, you actually have the stats in front of you going, yeah, we actually did fulfill 82% of our games, which is massive. The ones we didn't were this reason. And you'll find a lot of the time it falls back on the club as to why the game didn't happen. So having the stats can really, I suppose, benefit you in relation to where you want to go with the minimum standards.
Lynn, just before you move on that one, just something that came in from John in relation to a dual county. And John's making the point that it's impossible to have that as a minimum number of games. I suppose what would your advice be? And
that's, I suppose that's why the recommended is there. And the key thing you're looking for is that even across codes in relation to it, what's the minimum number of games? Because you'll find some players even across the dual thing, they end up maybe missing out on a lot of games from one code or the other from it. So that's why, in fairness, in ours, it's recommended. I know across some other sports, it's what's the word I'm looking for, Paula? That it has to happen. It's a must that's there in relation to it. Yeah. But in this, it's recommended. So certainly what you're looking for in that is, like, even if you're looking for 2/3 of that number, or you decide 50% of that number, that you want to get in it, but working across the other code as well as much as possible. I know it's not always possible, but reaching out, not always waiting for it to come the other way, just to see even the number of games the players are involved in. Because again, going back to the type of competitions you're running, not every player who's on that team is going to be a dual player. And that's what you have to remember. So maybe at the key times when championships happen, that's when they're the games that are going to be counted in everybody's thing. But remember the players who aren't dual players. So is there times maybe when, say that it's during the Camogie Championship, is it that you're running 7-a-sides or 9-a-sides? So the players who aren't the dual players are still getting up to the minimum standards of games. And that's the kind of thinking outside the box we need, is that we don't stop activity because of a few, the same as the player playing up a grade, and then that means the lower grade can't play anymore. That we think a little bit differently about how we make sure that the single code player is still getting plenty of games, because they might end up then the whole team only getting 6 games because of maybe 2 dual players. So perfect. I don't know if you've anything else on that one, Paula.
No, I think that makes sense. And I suppose a lot of counties are in that situation. And I know even in Dublin where they'd alternate on weekends, or they have that agreement that they're one weekend and Camogie would be the following weekend. But what they'd also look at is the clubs that are providing, that have dual players, because again, not every club is playing both. So they would also take that into consideration when setting up their fixtures as well for that alteration. But as you say, Lynn, it's like there's not everyone on the team is 14 years of age. It's not everyone on the team is a dual player. So it's keep bearing that in mind as well. Yeah, no, perfect.
Okay, so I suppose what we want you to ask yourself when you're looking at your own fixtures plan is, for the current year, did you meet the minimum standards? If you're sitting there going, yes, you're delighted with yourself. If you're sitting going, no, you might be going to, nobody's going to give you a slap on the wrist for it. They're recommended. It's something to try and aim for. And for some of you, you might be way above the minimum standards. And that's great too, because people want games. Have you engaged with your clubs to review? So have you actually asked the clubs, how did you feel the year went fixture-wise? What do you think worked? What didn't work? Okay, so what worked well, what didn't work well? What lessons do we need to bring for the coming year? Okay, so like that, was there a reason loads of games had to get cancelled? Is it something that could be easily fixed? No point in going through next year with the same thing, knowing the same problem's about to happen. Okay, so having a look at those things. And have you looked at the registration numbers for various grades to ensure appropriate games for all? So that there is, if there's particular age grades coming up in your, maybe there was a massive population spurt over a certain age grade where you normally would have only needed X amount of games for under 14s, but now you've those clubs actually have enough players for 2 teams each. There's no point in keeping the same structure when it doesn't fit the number of players that's in your county. So having a look at the registration numbers to help you out. And then for the fixture plan itself, then these are the steps in relation to actually planning it. So assess the number of dates required to finish each competition, prioritizing the championships. So start with your championships first. If you have your list, your adult championships, your minor, your under 16, your under 14, how many dates are going to be needed to finish all those? Because you're going to have to plot these into a calendar. So how many dates are going to be needed? Then look at the calendar, and remember, as we said, you can still use the first half of the year for club activity, focus on the non-county players. It's not that you can't do anything. That's still there. There's dates to be used for it. Add in the provincial and national fixtures so you can see where they actually pencil into it. And then prioritize the core age grades under 14, 16 adult. So they're the core age grades and the first teams at these age grades. And then you can worry about if there's a second league or a B team or a junior team of those, you can worry about those then. We're not saying don't give them football, of course, but just prioritize those first. And then I know in some counties, at different times of the year, they might decide to run, say, under 15 or under 17 to give extra football. So then that's when you plot that stuff in thereafter. So prioritize the other age grades first in relation to these. Then insert the most important competitions, and you can decide what that is. Obviously, things like your adult championship is going to be most important because that's where you're hanging a lot of your promotion of your games in your county on. So working back then from the final date. So what date do you want your final? So if you look at the national fixture plan, We had a date for Crow Park, full stop. So that's the date we had to start off. So the master fixture plan, I know Paula loves her little grids and everything when she's doing it, but that's the first date that went in it. Everything else was blank. And then it has to start working around it, because that's the date you're hung on. So look at the most important competitions and then work back. Then insert all other competitions, ensuring that they're spread to allow football for players of all ages throughout the season. And we'll show a little example of that as well. So that there's not, we'll do an under 12s, and when it's finished, we'll do our under 14s. When it's finished, we'll do our under 16s. When it's finished, we'll do our minors. Because that means there's always going to be players just playing in certain gaps, and they're done for the year. And as I said, remember, not all under 12 girls play under 14, for example. So there must be enough games for all girls at all the age groups, and liaise with other sports where possible. So just trying to see what's happening, keeping the player at the centre of everything that we're trying to do. For Go Games as well, remembering the Go Games rule, it is there in the official guide. Under 11 and younger is organised in the Go Games model. Under 12 is also Go Games, but at under 12, competitions can be organised on a league format. So on the basis that participating teams should be maximum 13 aside. So the rule is there in the rule book. Remember, the county board does not have to organise all the Go Games blitzes, but they can cluster clubs together to organise these with a host club. So I know in some counties what they do is they might put 5 clubs together, 5 clubs together, 5 clubs together. Club 1 hosts the blitz the first weekend, Club 2 might host it on the next date, Club 3 might host it on the next date. So they're nearly becoming self-sufficient in relation to it. Others is completely organised by the county board. But it's just important that our Go Games are in there. There are so many young girls playing football, but we have to remember there is a rule, and breaches of this will be referred to CODA. And we have had cases this year that we referred. You cannot have leagues, championships, tournaments with trophies, cups under 11 and below. Cannot happen. If it's seen, if it's reported, you will be brought to CODA. Okay, and I know I've had a few coaches over the last few weeks talking to me and giving out, like, I've gone to plenty of these tournaments over the last on blitzes. The girls just want to play games. Whether they've seen a cup or anything at the end of it didn't bother them. Okay, they just wanted to play the games, and actually those ones were probably the most enjoyable. I know I'm just up at a discussion on this on another meeting earlier, where a certain club attended a blitz that there was no cup threatened, had a ball, went to the next one, and there was an all-out melee in the semi-final by the mentors on the sideline. So with the cups, etc., brings it, but it's more to remember the rule is you can't do it. Okay, as I said, under 12. It's organised on the league format in relation to it. So just to be really aware of that in the Go Games, and make sure your clubs know it also. Okay,
yeah, Lynn,
that's the key.
Just on that one, just a question for, the under 12s are running a league. So can you have league finals like an A, B, C, D, E, F?
Yeah, you can.
League finals.
You can have a final of the league, so say the top 2 or whatever, but it can't be a league running into a championship final. Okay, so it is a league final. It's not a championship final. It's a league final in relation to it. And I think that the key one that we do see a lot of, and I know the Go Games, by the way, are being relaunched at the start of the year across all of Gaelic games with a whole new branding and everything else, which I think will be really good. Because what we have had is, like, if you listen to the radio over the last while, there's a lot of lip service about, oh, we wouldn't want to see this, we want to see this, and the same club is organising the tournament the next weekend. So it is important that we keep the girls at the centre of this, and that's what Go Games is in. It's research driven to give them plenty of football. So just to stress that when you're putting it in, and for your clubs to know this is what they can or can't do. So just on that, I suppose, the sample. So if you look at these 3 samples, so in this particular one, we've just thrown random dates in here, so don't worry about the dates in it. But in this example, what it's showing is that block thing. Okay, so maybe all the under 14s is played first. There's no sign of under 16s. There's no sign of minors. We're going to play all the under 14s. We'll get it done. Yeah, we'll put in some adult as well. Okay, and yeah, for some counties, that might be what works. But remember, if you've played off all your under 14s now, the ones who are moving on to play under 16, yeah, they'll get some more football coming on. But the ones who are only on the under 14 team are done. Okay, if that's when the under 14 fixtures is finished. So that's what I mean about just keep an eye on the blocks and how you're organising a block of fixtures. In this one, it could be a little bit different in that you've under 14, 16 minor. You might, some counties might say we couldn't do this because there's far too much of an overlap in players, and that's fine. Okay, each county is going to do it. So in this one, it's showing all age groups happening on different days, or moving into the week. So under 14s maybe on a Monday, under 16s on the Friday. Yes, there might be an overlap of 2 or 3 players across each of them. That's kind of showing it. Again, it depends on your county, because if you see the next one, then it's a little bit more spread out. So it's still not done in blocks. So there's only the under 14s and maybe 16s happening at a time. The 18s might kick in the weeks that the under 16s not. So a bit like Paula talked about, say football one weekend and camogie the other. This is a bit like under 16 one week, minor next week, under 16. So those age groups that we are potentially going to lose players at that don't get football, that we're making sure they all get football, but not in blocks. So regardless of if that's only one team you play on, you're still guaranteed getting football every couple of weeks. So it's just to have a little think when you're plotting your fixtures. How do we make sure when we look at the overall calendar that we don't have blocks for the age groups and then they're done? How do we make sure there's a bit more of a spread in what we're trying to do? I said, and avoid that thing of the under 20 or whatever thrown in at the end. So they're just a few little samples, and hence why we said we can't create the ideal fixture plan, because different counties have different numbers of teams, different numbers of rounds that you need for competitions. It's a matter then of plotting it into it in relation to it. But the glue for all this is the competition guidelines. Okay, so if you don't have the competition guidelines, you're going to constantly have teams pulling out. You won't know what points was supposed to be for a draw, what was. So competition guidelines are the glue. It means your fixtures committee can keep working as a fixtures committee. If a team doesn't fulfill, it doesn't need to go to the county board meeting, because it was clearly in the agreed competition guidelines at the start of the year. So that's what they're trying to do, the glue that'll pull the whole thing together. Samples of them, there is samples of them on the website, and we can send you the sample of them, but it's very important you make them specific to your own county. Okay, so what's going to work for your county? That they're done in conjunction with the LGFA official guide and the county bylaws. You can have general guidelines and then specific for each competition. We'll show you a little example of that in a second. The key of this is to ensure fixtures take place as planned. So if they were supposed to be on a certain date, unless there was something exceptional, they go ahead on that date. The big one, it prevents a county board meeting being consumed by fixtures, because anything around the fixtures goes back to the fixtures committee, because it's clearly there in the guidelines. And what you need to do is think, what guidelines should you have in place to ensure your fixtures go ahead as planned? Kind of think ahead. Is there a loophole we're going to need to block here? How are we going to do it? What guideline will we need in it? I suppose, Paula, before we get into the guidelines themselves, have you anything on those few points?
Yeah, the other thing that was screaming at me, Lynn, when you were talking is CODA. So a lot of people love to send a good fixture problem to CODA. But again, the first thing when it comes to us CODA officers is that we will ask about what your competition regulations are. And as Lynn has outlined, when your competition regulations are in place that have been passed by a full county board meeting, and I think this is really important as well, if there's anybody from a divisional board on, that even your fixture regulations must go to the full county board meeting for ratification as well, not just ratified at your own divisional board. So it's really important to note that. But once they are, as Lynn has outlined, the fixtures committee go to the guidelines, they implement the guidelines, what the regulation is, and then they send it out. And yes, if someone appeals that, that's fine, that can go to CODA, but it'll still come back to what your competition regulations are and when did you ratify them. So 2 very key things. And I know Alana said, is it beneficial to have fixtures only meetings outside of county board meetings? And really, if you've your main fixture meeting at the start of the year where you're ratifying your plan, and then as Lynn has outlined, that review meeting at the end of the year, and you've your fixture regulations, you shouldn't really need any other fixture specific meeting. Lynn, I don't know if you'd agree on that, but yeah, that'd be my thoughts.
Fixtures, there's a fixtures committee to allow them to deal with fixtures. So they might have to report on a few things at a county board meeting, like the chairperson of your fixtures committee or whatever. But this is the problem with county board meetings becoming fixtures meetings. So they shouldn't need to, once, as Paula said, the plan's done at the start of the year, the competition guidelines are done, the fixtures then go. Let the fixtures committee go and do what their job is, which is to roll out those as per the guidelines ratified in it. And it's only any issues then that should come to a county board meeting thereafter. And it just allows then your county board meetings to become about your business of your county and not consumed by fixtures.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, so we're nearly there, we're getting there, don't worry. Competition guidelines, I said, there is samples of them there, but it is very important that you make them specific to your county. Okay, so some of the headings, and these are only just samples, are the fixtures themselves, referees, results, placings, match day, regulations. What do we mean by that? These are not them all, there's loads more. Changing the date of a fixture, some of the headings that might be under fixtures, failing to fulfill a fixture. So in other words, clearly in the guidelines, if a team fails to fulfill a fixture, what happens? So if it clearly states what happens, well, then you don't need to bring it to a county board meeting, because they know when they ratified it at the start of the year, that's what happened if you didn't fulfill a fixture. Failing to fulfill multiple fixtures, postponing matches, clear eligibility, county teams, exceptional circumstances. How often do you hear, oh, we have to cancel the match, it's exceptional circumstances? You need to define at the start of the year what is exceptional circumstances. Pitch availability, clubs with 2 teams, so if they have an A and a B team, and then determining places on a league table. So these are just some of the things, and we'll show you a few examples of those as we go along. But you need to have regulations in place or competition guidelines in place for these in the event that they do happen. Okay, and Paul, I know those, particularly those last few, we've had a few cases of this year. I don't know if you want to give an example. No, I don't mean specific examples.
Well, let me tell you about this county. No, absolutely. And they probably have arisen and been brought before CODA. So from that regard, they've been very 2 clear gaps that were in regulations within that county. So if a club has 2 teams in any competition, yes, the rule states there that they have to name their top 15 for their A team, but are you doing that? When do they have to submit that? What's the time frame before the competition? And then who's monitoring to make sure that none of those A players are playing on the B team if the A team has got knocked out? So it's really important that that's clearly outlined. And again, if that does happen, what's the penalty? What's the sanction? Because in our rule book, we would have a rule saying if they fail to fulfill a fixture, it may be sent to CODA. However, if you've got it addressed in your competition regulation, it doesn't need to go to CODA, because you've clearly, as Lynn has outlined, it's a fine, they've lost their game, they're removed from the competition, whatever you deem that is. But at least you have it clearly outlined. I know, Lynn, even the determining places on league table, since we've moved probably to more of a result on the day situation, we would probably have, and where we need league covered off. I know us even looking at the National League conditions for how we would determine places, we've added like a 5th scenario even in there for the highest number of goals scored, isn't it? As a very last option if all the other situations happen to be met by the 2 teams, because I know it was a case not this year but the year before, Roscommon and Sligo might have finished on equal points, might have finished on the same score difference, might have finished on the same points scored, and we were nearly in a situation we had no time for playoffs because they weren't in the calendar, it didn't allow it due to the condensed season. So it was like, how were we going to determine it? And I thankfully on the day it was settled on the pitch without us needing to do. But we do have that classic camogie situation where they had to toss a coin, and really that's what we have to avoid here by your fixture regulations. But every year, Lynn, we would tweak our national regulations, be it at league or in championship, to make sure they're covered, as Lynn has said, when we review, to go, okay, we do need to add that in. So for example, for the National League, even this year, we've added in another part of the regulation that every home team must have a backup pitch, especially for those early rounds of the league, to make sure if they lose their pitch, there is another backup playable pitch is what we've added in. So if it's 3G, you can play in 3G, but it has to be playable. So that's just a new regulation we've added in this year to try to avoid losing any fixtures.
And I think what you're stressing to your clubs at the start of the year, and yourselves as executives, to really read through these in detail before you ratify them. Because like that instance, say, with the toss of the coin, that was ratified at the start of that year. So counties went, oh yeah, that's great, until it happened them. And then there's all around uproar. So really reading through the stuff, yeah, we're happy to ratify them and then get them ratified and move on. So some of the examples, I said, we're not going to go through all these, but just so you can see, I said there is a sample document there with examples of all these. But for instance, changing the data for fixture. So it clearly states there how clubs can go ahead by changing data for fixture. So they must agree to an alternative date before seeking permission to change the game from the fixture coordinator. No games can be moved or changed without permission. Failure to adhere to this will result in the loss of points. So it doesn't need to go to the county board, because if they didn't do it, the fixtures committee knows it results in the loss of the points. So that's what we mean about having clear details. The last line there, if teams fail to agree on a change, then the fixture reverts to the original date and time. So it stops them having to go, oh, we can't come up with an agreement. Well, if you can't, it's still on Sunday, 2 o'clock. That's it. Clear cut. That's how it happens. Another example there, postponing matches. So matches can only be cancelled at short notice in the event of a bereavement of a close family member of a player, mentor or match official, serious tragedy in the parish, and provide the fixtures and opposing team have been informed. The key thing here, the close family member is defined. So that you're not having a phone call going, well, it was a great grandmother, or it was a 22nd cousin. Okay, so it clearly states who that close family member is and why the game can actually be cancelled. So just, again, it's just to cover, instead of, I know there's definitely true circumstances, obviously the games are off, but how often is the rows over, oh, we doubt that happened, or we're doubting it happened. So it just covers everything very clear for you. And another one there, pitch availability, where a pitch is not available for playing a match at the prescribed date or time, the home club should endeavour to find an alternative pitch, or will lose home advantage and will play their home pitch, the opponent's pitch. So there you are. If you can't get a pitch, and you do find, maybe there was a few cases where one club might be doubting another club, saying they just didn't want to play because they're missing X, Y, and Z. Well, in this case, you're going to have to find X, Y, or Z, because they're going to be playing on the other pitch if you can't find one of your own. Or in the case of a match in neutral venue, the venue can be changed. So it's just putting it very clear that you don't have clubs able to come back at you to want the game played. For referees, again, some examples: who appoints them, who's going to contact them, what's the behaviour and conduct, and then the expenses, so that it's clearly how much does referees get for X game, who pays it, and it's all very clear then in competition guidelines from the start. So that's just an example of some of the referee stuff. The same with results. If the referee is appointed by the fixtures committee, so in this case they can send the text back through the games management system. So if it's an automated system, like we have the ability for with Fearon, the games management system, if it's automated, how do the text back? Or if it's the coordinator, if the referee is not appointed, how did the text back? So how are you going to make sure you get the official result back in, that it's clearly in the competition guidelines? The same with decision on placings. So as Paula mentioned, what is the actual guidelines when two teams tie? What are they? That we're not going, we're in the last round of the league, it looks like two teams might tie. What's going to happen if they do? Okay, what are we going to do? We'll go to the head-to-head, but what happens if it was a draw? Okay, so that these are done at the start of the year and there's no arguments over, well, how did they come up with that decision? Okay, or having to look for a playoff when you don't have a date to do it. So have it very clear what happens, how are points calculated. And that can be for the same for all competitions, or it can be different for each competition you're running. The same around the timing and days of games. Do you actually put in, so then there's no arguments. You can clearly see that all adult games are 7:30 on a Wednesday. So the only times they can be changed are as per the guideline you had there earlier, if you needed to change the date of a fixture. So it's all very structured, people know what's happening. And what's really good, I suppose, if you are a dual county, if you're coming up to that agreement around the alternating weeks or the alternating times, at least it means the clubs have to stick to it. The only way they can change it means they're actually agreeing for their own players who might have dual players, etc., of moving a time. But at least there's clear dates there for the alternating fixtures. Match day, again, what's the numbers that's allowed? So obviously there's a maximum amount they're allowed per rule anyway, but clearly in it. And it is important around the sideline piece as well. We find, even particularly with club championships, when they come into, say, provincial level or national level, there's nearly all-out war over, what do you mean we're only allowed 7 officials? We had 27 of them during the club championship in the county. Okay, so it's the same guidelines that they're adhere to it. And it's not just because it's a guideline, it's to help your referees as well. I mean, it's hard enough having X amount on the sideline, but to have another 10 people who shouldn't be there, it shouldn't be happening. So that you're adhering to that rule from the start. And to be fair, in your lines people as well, that they're able to do it. So have those clear match day guidelines. And as I said, competition regulations, you can have different ones for each grade. So you can see there, playing rules, what are they? The number of players. So in this case, it's adult level. So 15 aside at whatever. Substitutes, what is it? Walkovers, what happens? Okay, so it clearly states there. Again, that is something that if a team give a walkover, if you didn't have competition guidelines, that's something that's liable to land at your county board meeting. What are we going to do with St Mary's because they give a walkover to St Patrick's? It shouldn't have landed at your county board meeting because it was covered in your competition guidelines. St Mary's, no, they're fined €50 or whatever it was. Then you can have different things maybe for the cup competition and the championship, the league. So maybe what players are eligible to play, how many divisions is, maybe there's unlimited subs in the cup. So what is it? So now if I'm the adult club manager, on this page, I can see what I can do in all competitions for the year. So it is important that you have the regulations for every competition that you're running the whole way up through it. And they're agreed at the start of the year, not, as Paula said, a week out, and then there's nearly 2 weeks spent arguing over changing the regulations. So make sure they're very clear from the start of the year. So planning in your county, what it shouldn't ensure is that there's enough games being played for players at all age grades. That's the key thing. That there's not too much or too little time between fixtures. And that's why you can see the importance also of the competition guidelines, that maybe a league, all the games were finished, bar there was one game that got cancelled, and now we have to wait 2 months for that one game to be finished to see how placements are going to be. So that's why your guidelines make sure your scheduling will stay on place. That there's not too short a time period for fixtures, so they're well spread out. They're setting advance and plans forward at clubs at the start of the year, so they're able to have a life and know when they can come and go. And fixtures should take place in their scheduled date and competition rules in place to ensure this happens. So that example, as we said, the game was set for Sunday, the 11th of August at 2 p.m, unless agreed by both teams to play before that date, because that's what it says in the competition guidelines. And it cannot be played after the date unless exceptional circumstances. And it's listed what the exceptional circumstances may be. So that's really the importance of planning. Paul, have you anything else just in the importance of planning before I suppose we wrap these pieces up?
Yeah, no, I think one of the other things that came up there recently enough was a county had agreed, I think it was passed in the meeting, to run an extra competition towards the end of the year. They had obviously got interest from the clubs earlier in the year, and then when they went to run it, a number of clubs pulled out of the competition. So I suppose it's looking at that, and as Linda said, if you're planned and if that competition is there, then what is the latest date you can have people signing up to participate in that competition too, because the whole competition got mixed up for the remaining clubs. And then also there was a number of players who wanted permission to play with clubs because they didn't have any football then at that age group in their club. And there was a lot of melee around this certain competition, because again, it seemed like it was just something, let's put it in, let's do this. And there was no planning around it in terms of that. So I think that's really important as well, for what's the time frame for clubs to confirm their participation in that. And then again, if they pull out, what is I suppose, is there any sanctions or any penalty on that?
And I suppose the big point, we know this might seem like there's a lot of work in it, but a lot of it is at the start of the year. And that's what I meant about getting the planning right. I know like one of the comments was the amount of work that's in fixtures, but actually if all this is done at the start of the year and there's clear guidelines, there's a lot less work, because clubs can't be coming to you left, right and centre to change fixtures or to move this, because they clearly can see how they can do it and when they can do it within. So it actually should make your life a little bit easier if you're involved in fixtures by having all these in place. As I said, the results, clear competition guidelines and a fixture plan, clearly there from the start, a smoother running of fixtures. Everyone knows when they're happening, why they're happening. If they don't, what's going to happen with them in relation to it. The fixtures committee can fulfil their role. And as we said, county board meetings do not get consumed by fixtures. County board meetings should be getting your county thinking ahead, whereas it tends to be always, or a lot of the meeting consumed by looking backwards at fixtures that should have happened or might have happened or whatever. But the overall thing is more games get played. And that's what wants to happen. Players want to play games. So more games get played. So remember, national and provincial fixtures, they may be in the first part of the season, but that does not mean no club activity. We cannot stress that enough. Because there's, as I said, there's the myth out there that there's no club activity in this half. That's not what it's saying. Okay, but what's the type of competitions that you're going to have? And that there's still meaningful football for the non-county players. And I know many years ago, even my own county was a 9-a-side league played when the county was playing. And I know even as county players, like we were jealous of the players who were playing in the 9-a-side league because it looked great crack and we weren't allowed playing it. But that was great for those players because they still got loads of football. So making sure we keep all them going. Plan in advance because that increases the access to pitches. So if you know well in advance, this is when our key finals, for instance, are going to be, you can book the venues earlier for those. And particularly within counties because you're not worried about massive spreads of where they're coming from, etc. So there can be key central venues that they're going to come to. Look at the number of games you will have to assess requirements of referees. Do you need more? Because if you do, you need to act now. Getting your referee courses booked in to get referees ready for next year. Have a plan A and B depending on when teams potentially exit the championship. So if a team, like the All-Ireland final, there's only 6 teams going to be there. Okay. For some teams, they're finished at the start of July. Okay, so there's a big difference finishing at the start of July, finishing at the 16th of 13th, 16th, I keep forgetting part of the date, of August the 13th. So I'll be sitting on my own on the Tuesday in Croke Park, but on the 13th. So have that plan A and plan B depending on when teams potentially exit. And remember, don't leave any age group until the end. It is a real, it's a frustration when you see fixture plans, particularly minor football for some reason, where it literally starts in the end of October, November, like in a lot of cases, the coldest months, the wettest months, and the age group that people keep saying we can't hold on to. And we get, oh yeah, but they're playing adult football as well. No, the better of those minors is playing adult football. The ones you're most likely to lose are the ones, as I said, that's the opposite of burnout and aren't getting anything. So how do we make sure we get them playing football throughout the year as well? So they're just some of the things to remember. And the take-home message is the last one for you. All executive must be fully aware of the importance of reviewing all fixtures. I said, I know some counties who actually appoint what they call a fixtures reviewer. So they're not the person rolling out the fixture. They're literally sitting in the background. So they have the master fixture plan for your county, and their role is looking at it going, okay, this amount of fixtures was supposed to happen this weekend. Marketing, yes, they did. No, they didn't. Why? So it means that maybe at 6 months, they'll provide you with a report going, that 80% you were trying to achieve, we're actually at 79%, or we're actually at, so I suppose helping you out to carry out that review throughout the year. And they're independent to that secretary committee in place. Communication is obviously key. If that does happen, they're working with, trying to help the fixtures committee, not against them. So don't be afraid of a person who's in that role. If the fixtures committee are reviewing the fixtures, just to be an open mind, that if people do come up with stuff, suggestions for change, it's not a bad thing. They're not saying you're doing something wrong. They're actually just trying to help you out to maybe make things a little better in relation to it. The goal is to achieve the minimum standards, as we mentioned. Essential to liaise with clubs because this will encourage cooperation, particularly around less games being cancelled, etc. And the key message is value for money with the number of games. Paula had a line earlier, our players become members to play games. So they a lot of times say the cost to play football, the cost to go swimming. Actually, if they're getting value for what they're doing, there's very little sports that if you're getting that minimum number of games for the price that you're paying, you average that out per game, it's not much, considering you'd pay probably triple that for 10 sessions of swimming or gymnastics or whatever it is course that you're doing, or art classes or whatever. So what we need to be showing them is it's not the cost of the price you're paying, look at the value you're getting by being involved in the sport within our county. And I guarantee if you get the scheduling set to right and work out how many games girls have been involved in versus the registration, the value they're going to be getting is phenomenal, and you're giving that value to them by how you're putting the fixtures in place. So that's really important. So I suppose just to wrap up, and feel free to type in any questions and Paula will answer them. The key part, as I said, we can't give you the ideal fixture plan, but all we're hoping is that we sparked a few little things for you tonight in relation to putting your fixture plan in place early. The competition guidelines, said the samples are up there on the website. What we'll do is everyone who is logged on tonight, we'll send you a copy of those anyway. They're not, that's your competition guidelines. You need to work with them to come up for your own county in relation to it. But the key is to get it right for your own county where it works in relation to it. Paul, have you anything to kind of wrap up on that? And as I said, if anyone has any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat, and between the pair of us, we'll make an effort on them too.
Oh, you're going to help me then, are you?
Sometimes.
Yeah, no, I think Lynn's take-home slide there is really good. And the other thing is to also use each other. Talk to others in other counties who you know has a similar structure, similar size, or similar situation to you, or where you've heard good things that their regulations are really good, or you know this particular county gets all their games played on a certain time or whatever. Talk to each other, because really, and as Lynn said, no one has that ingredient of the ideal master fixture plan, because if they did, I think they'd be a millionaire. I'd say every sport would want it, because I don't think any sport has an ideal fixture plan. But it is about every year reviewing it and making sure it works for your county, but not being afraid to change it up when it doesn't work, and to try something else new the next year. Because I think the clubs will appreciate that you're making efforts to put in a different structure there, and to see, will this work? And they'll buy into that and give you feedback on going, no, you know what, we tried it, but it didn't work. Let's go back to the original. I know one question has come in, Lynn. It's about, can cups be presented at the under-12 league finals? And I suppose from my experience and what I've seen where counties have done this really well, they haven't presented a cup, but what they've done is they've actually ran their, what they've called their finals as a massive sort of blitz day festival of football, and every kid leaves with a medal. So yes, they know team A has won, but they haven't put a cup in, because the whole ethos of the whole competition has been about developing our under 12s and everyone playing and everyone participating. So like, to me, in the ethos of what Go Games is and Go Practice, I would say no to cups, but I don't think there's a hard and fast rule, Lynn, is there?
Yeah, like the only ones you can, by rule, I suppose you're allowed at under 12. As Paula says, there's the best practices by rule, but certainly nothing below. And as I said, the biggest issue, I suppose, as I said, we keep coming against is maybe memorial tournaments. And like, you can still have a memorial tournament without having the person's name on a cup. I think that's what the key thing to remember. You can still have people coming and playing 10 games and it's still X person's tournament without having to present a cup. So they're the ones you cannot. And I know across all Gaelic Games codes, there's going to be a massive clampdown on this next year. But as Paula says, think what's best for your girls. And I think even when you're organising your competitions, like, being a bit innovative about what your competitions look like as well. If a girl is playing at under 12 and the football she's playing looks the exact same as what it's going to look like when she becomes an adult footballer, she's probably going to be bored in a lot of the cases by the time she gets to adult, where she's playing something different at under 12, 14, 16 minor that gets closer looking to what the adult football is. Well, then I think you're going to spark her interest a lot more up through it as well. So don't be afraid to be a little bit innovative in your county as well. And if you have good practices, let us know, because we want to showcase good practice too. But I suppose, like we said at the start, like, number one thing, patting the back for the counties for the amount of fixtures that's been rolled out. It doesn't go unnoticed. And like, that's a huge thing that you're doing for so many girls across your county. So thanks a million on that one. I think we're avoiding questions, so that could be a good thing.
I think it is a good thing, Lynn, and probably an ideal time to wrap it up then. So
yeah, so thanks a million everyone for logging on tonight. I know we've a few more coming up in our county leadership series, so feel free to share with your executive officers and sign up on those. and we will have details of an upcoming county day as well, but that will be going out over the coming weeks. But thanks a million everyone for logging on. Hopefully you got something from it, and we will share the sample competition guidelines as well with everyone that was logged on. So thanks everyone.